Let's pick up from there and bring in Christopher Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America in the Americas Program at Chatham House. Christopher, as always, welcome to France 24. Pleasure to have you here. How is Brazil going to ride this particular tariff wave?
Well, it looks like Lula is up for the fight. He's standing tough against President Trump. He said that he will negotiate the tariffs on economic terms in ways that will protect Brazilian workers, but he's clearly not going to back down on the main charges or the main justification for the tariffs, which is the independent justice system that is investigating Jair Bolsonaro's coup attempt in January 8th, 2023. So they're standing tough. They will be affected by it, but he does not want to back down on what is clearly an intervention on Brazil's democratic system.
Hang on, so let's hold the phone. Let's go into that a bit more because we're talking trade tariffs. But on the other hand, what you're saying and what we've all been saying is that this is actually about Bolsonaro. So this is, in a sense, Trump trying to interfere in how Brazil runs the country.
Exactly. Basically, we have an independent judicial system in a democracy in Brazil that is trying a friend or ally of Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, who ruled until 2023, who lost an election to Lula, who refers to himself as a tropic Trump, and who basically took a playbook out of Donald Trump. When he lost the elections, he tried to cast doubts on the electoral process and then mobilized his supporters and even called for the military to intervene. And January 8th, those supporters ransacked the Congress and ransacked the judicial system. Now he's under indictment, and an independent judicial system, and the Justice Alexandre de Moraes is trying him. And Trump he's making no bones about it. He's basically demonstrating this is about what he calls a witch hunt against his ally. This is a very strange way and reason to apply tariffs.
Now, if Vladimir Putin tried a similar thing in another country, of course, everybody across the world would be howling foul about this, wouldn't they, completely? But yet this appears to be going somewhat under the radar in a sense. I know we're talking about it, and that's probably is a feather in your cap, sir, because you're really illuminating this topic. In terms of what happens, though, how does Lula fight this? I'm wondering, is there any basis in what Bolsonaro says about, the election might have been tainted in some way? Is it, again, as inaccurate as Trump's claims about what happened to his defeat to Biden?
It is equally inaccurate. And the truth is before the election, the people reviewed and audited the electoral system in Brazil. They confirmed it was credible. Brazil has one of the most modern electoral systems, basically a digitized electronic system. You can trace the votes from when they're cast until how they're counted and then published. This was a completely spurious accusation. And even other countries tried to get Jair Bolsonaro to walk back his attempt to cast doubt on this electoral process. This was straight out of Trump's playbook. And what we're seeing is not just the issue of levying economic tariffs, which again is just completely out of the normal, as you said. And I don't know why more people aren't utterly disgusted by this, but also the sanctioning of, as you mentioned in your earlier report, the sanctioning of a Supreme Court justice by freezing his assets in the United States under what the U.S. calls global Magnitsky sanctions, which are actually intended to be sanctions to sanction individuals for human rights abuses and for corruption. It's a complete abuse of that authority under the U.S. Treasury Department. And again, what's surprising is whether it's a Treasury Secretary, whether it's a Secretary of State, or whether it's the U.S. President himself, they're not even attempting to hide the fact that this has nothing to do with economics and everything to do with what they feel is the persecution of a political ally of Donald Trump and someone who, in effect, did attempt to try a coup. And he's not even been indicted yet. I mean, he's been indicted. He's not been convicted yet. This is simply a trial under a democratic system and under an independent judicial system. It is beyond bizarre.
Indeed, all the things that you're pointing out, Christopher, say that there is fairness in the process that Jair Bolsonaro will face, and that what Donald Trump is trying to do in terms of using these tariffs as a threat, clearly it goes beyond what should be the legal and good remit of any US president. I'm wondering how Lula da Silva now fights this one. What can he use in terms of trying to sort of dissuade Trump? How can he sort of try to play Trump back?
Well, first, this will probably play very much to Lula's political favor. There are elections next year. If Jair Bolsonaro was found guilty, he wouldn't have been able to compete in those elections. But Lula was going to compete. And in fact, his popularity had been declining. Now we've seen it increase. He's taking this as a way of saying that Jair Bolsonaro is basically an enemy of the Brazilian people, that Brazilian people, because of these tariffs, will suffer because of his actions and the actions of his son, Eduardo Bolsonaro, who's a congressman, who's been basically residing in the United States, lobbying the U.S. White House to impose these sanctions and impose these tariffs. Now Lula's turning it on them and saying, well, I defend the Brazilian people. And if this goes forward and this election goes forward, Lula will probably stand a pretty good chance of getting reelected, something that wasn't that clear just a few weeks ago.
Christopher Sabatini, as always, pleasure to speak to you, sir. Your insight always illuminates these stories for us. Thank you so very much indeed. We will be watching for developments in Brazil, and thanks again to Christopher Sabatini joining us from Chatham House.